you smell one of the vials and it's almost too strong because it's the most like potent terpenes you can get.
Welcome to the Greener Grass podcast from BlueBird Botanicals. I'm your host, Lex Pelger. We're living in a golden age of cannabis cultivation and production. So today I want to explore how we go from a seed to a plant to a smokable product. To learn more, we visited the production facilities of Verde Natural. They grow organic cannabis in the Denver area, and they're at the forefront of quality growing and innovative processing in the industry. Today, they'll teach us about the history of cannabis production, the high-tech machinery that makes today's mass market possible, and what it's like to work in a green factory. Join me for this tour of Verde Natural to see how quality cannabis products get made. This show is brought to you by BlueBird Botanicals, to spread education about cannabis and other things on the greener side of life. BlueBird CBD oil comes from farms in southern Colorado and is grown using only water, soil, and sunlight. Go to bluebirdbotanicals.com for more info. I arrived at Verde Natural here on the northern side of Denver, and you could see a swarm of construction guys working to build a new greenhouse on the side of their building. As I entered the facility, they checked my identification in front of the cameras that are always broadcasting to the state. They gave me a badge and then led me into their fully organic, pesticide-free grow up. Hello, everybody. We are here at Verde Natural with
Julian
and Jamie.
Rachel.
All right, and now on with the show. So, can you tell me about this area? Like what it is, what it looks like?
So this is just the main workspace that we do a lot of the transplants. We also have our nutrient stations out here and 4 different tea brewers, 2 veg specific and 2 flower specific that we use as well.
So what's the tea used for? Why does the tea make things so special?
So we're really trying to inoculate the soil with as many different beneficial microbes that we can, a lot of beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungi. That's really the heart of our system. Is the more of those we have in, and the more we take care of those beneficials, the more they're going to take care of our plants and break down our nutrients and really feed them. So that's super important.
Can you tell me about the cycle of what a plant would go through here? How they would start out?
Yeah, so we take cuts off of our plants 2 weeks before they actually go into flower, just as part of our production. So we'll take those cuts, they'll sit in the cloners for 2 weeks. When they have well-developed roots, we'll then transplant them into 3-gallon pots, which they'll stay in for the rest of the time in veg. They'll then go into the veg rooms where they'll sit under T5 lights for about 2 weeks, and then we move them into a little bit higher of an intensity lighting under the 315s, and they'll be under those for the remaining 6 weeks, and then we'll transplant them into flower. They'll be in flower for 8 weeks. After that, we cut those down, and then we take the root balls out. We've been reusing the same soil here in this facility for 2.5 years now, so that's a really, really cool thing. We'll take out the root balls, then we'll turn the soil with shovels, do just a simple NPK test with that, check the EC and check the pH of the soil as well, and then we'll take those results and then determine what we're going to use as far as the amounts of granular nutrients like alfalfa meal, kelp meal, dolomite lime, the humic acids, and things like that.
And can you explain those acronyms, the NPK?
Yeah, the NPK is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels. So those are always the 3 numbers that you'll see on any nutrient that you buy, whether it's granular or liquid. So that's the percentage of each of those elements that are in there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And so what's the overall time then from a cutting to a full plant that's going to yield a bunch of cannabis?
18 weeks total.
And how big are the plants getting that we're talking about?
So typically, depending on strain, we'll see them anywhere between 3.5 to 5 feet when they go into flower, and then also like the first week that they're in the flower rooms, they're still transitioning into flower mode, so they're still getting a lot of lateral growth. So we usually see about another foot or so of growth after we transplant them into the flower rooms.
Danger, potential oxygen deficient atmosphere. And so 4 rows of plants going from just a couple inches high all the way up to a couple of feet high.
Yep.
And so they're just moving through the facility as you rotate them.
Yep, exactly.
What's the most important parts to pay attention to when the plants are at this young stage?
Really everything. This is the foundation for their life. So veg is super important. The healthier they are in veg, the healthier they're going to be and produce the best they can for us in flower. You really can relate it to humans. You have a really tough, tragic childhood where you have some issues and a lot of stresses and things like that. It carries with you. So it's a very similar thing with the plants. If they have a stressed out and a tough time and they're looking really bad from the start, you can have them looking good by the end of veg, but they're still not going to produce like they should for you in flowers. So it's a very key part of the growing process.
And so what have you found has been the most helpful for keeping those stresses down?
So really just the feeds that we do. The most important thing that we do day to day is pruning the plants and trimming them out. That's really one of my biggest beliefs as far as keeping their health and making sure that we're cutting off places that are going to be wasted energy. So before the plant even puts all of its energy into creating 2 inches of a node, we're going to remove that so we can put its 2 inches into the lateral growth, into the spots that we actually want to keep. Things like this is like a new soil that we're trying, so we'll do trials with, and obviously like there's a big difference with the way you need to take care of this soil as compared to the one that we're used to. So these are things that we'll just end up trashing, and because obviously that's not a good start for their life.
Right. Looking at some plants that are looking a little gray around the gills. And so it sounds like experimentation is really important here for you all.
Definitely, yeah. We have a really, really solid foundation, and we're super happy with the system that we have, but we're always trying to innovate and become the best that we can. So.
What kind of lights are high up on the ceiling?
So those are the 315s that are up there. This is the final stage up top before they go into flower, so those are going to be always the biggest plants with the little bit further.
It's a ceramic element. It's different than down here you have the T5 light, which is fluorescent, and then up there you have the ceramic, so it's a little bit of a different spectrum of lighting.
Is it pretty close to a full spectrum lighting in general, or do you purposely keep it to what these are?
Aren't the 315s are fairly full spectrum?
Yep. Yeah, it's a beautiful scene. Everybody's climbing around all the 4 stories and moving around all the cannabis plants. It feels like a place of love. So this is the veg team with a beautiful plant. Can you tell me about the plant you're holding?
Yeah, it's a strain called Bear Claws. It's an OGKB 2.0 crossed with OGKB crossed with 3 chems by a breeder named Mycotech. It's pretty much a super cookies, basically. Just a super resinous polyhybrid. Yeah, this is our first pheno hunt on it. We're gonna see how it does. And
can you tell me what a pheno hunt is?
so with these seeds, you're gonna have different characteristics in every single seed that you're gonna pop, different traits. It's like having kids. You can have the same mom and dad, but all your kids are gonna be a little bit different. Basically, we're just trying to find the exact pheno that's gonna work best for us, whether it be for making hash, for yields, for flower production.
And so once you find that perfect plant, then it'll be clones for a long time.
Yeah, we'll keep that. We'll probably select maybe 2 phenos out of this run, keep those for clones, and put those into mass production.
How long can these plants be cloned? Does it feel infinite, or will it eventually run out of vigor?
Some people say there's a genetic drift doing clones. It really depends on the health of the plant throughout the cycle, and the health of the plant and when you're actually taking those cuts. I think the characteristics of that health will transfer throughout throughout that lineage of taking cuts from the same plants and not doing moms. Like we don't do moms here, so we'll cut with each cycle. We haven't really seen much differences in yields or anything like that since we've been doing it, but it's kind of one of those things. There's not a lot of research really that pinpoints yes or no, this is good or bad, but some people will say yes, some people will say no. So it's kind of really up to the grower and what works best for them.
And so the genetics are obviously really important, but looking around here, it seems like you really make sure to pay attention to your environment, and that's the other part of the struggle.
Environment is probably one of your most important things. If your environment isn't good, your plants aren't going to be healthy. So it really comes down to your environment and your feeding schedule. That your 2 biggest areas that you need to have your complete focus on.
I think you see the difference though in hands-on approach where you're really treating the plants as individuals versus just big giant groups. For instance, our kind of attrition rate is super low. And I think that's really because we give the plants that individual care, really make sure that we're treating the plants the best we can on a one-on-one basis and really taking care of them from the very beginning all the way through. And that way we get stronger, healthier plants, and we're also able to put almost all of our plants into flower instead of constantly having to kill them and work through like a really high volume number of plants to get those really good ones that we want in the end. So it's a lot more work, but in the end, it's totally worth it.
There'd be about 15 hurricane fans on the walls. There are cameras in every room that could be watched by the state of Colorado. There's a 4-rack system that goes all the way to the ceiling, filled with plants ranging from small to large. And they really do look like their own. They each have their own individual care. It's not just a whole bunch of plants in a row. It's beautiful work they're doing here. Oh, and here's the water. So do you think the state ever watches these cameras?
They can at any time.
Yeah. Do you suspect that they're too understaffed, that they probably never glance at them?
Oh,
I think it's very rare, but by law, we have to hold 45 days of footage for them to come review at any point in time. And yeah, you can get fined if you don't have those 45 days on file. A lot of regulation, but I think it's regulation will weed out the good and the bad people in this industry.
What are the best regulations you feel like are happening in the state where they're really doing a good job?
I honestly think Colorado is on top of it. We are an example for the rest of the country. I think as time goes on, though, we're going to see loosening of regulation, especially in Colorado. I think Colorado is probably one of the most stricter states right now.
A lot of the regulation lies for safety matters, though, like pesticides. You want to make sure that your product you're not smoking something that's going to be harmful to you. Another one is potency. You want to know how potent the material that you're smoking or using is, because it's all about the dosage, So if you know your dosage and you can titrate it properly and get the medicine you need, then you can go back and see, okay, this was 26% THC, contained these terpenes. What's something in this realm that I might find that benefits me as well? There you can go, we do terpene analysis, we do potency analysis on every strain that we do.
I think one of the tough things that we've seen also, just us being organic, is the microbial. Because right now Colorado State they test just very general for microbial. It's not pathogenic versus beneficial by any means. So that definitely limits like the amount of foliar applications with teas we can do into flower and things like that. So that's something I would love to see them work on, but most likely probably won't see them be working on anytime soon.
Yeah, because it's just so complicated. All these little bugs, and people like to assume they're just everything little is bad.
Yeah, when most of it, like a lot of these are needed and beneficial, and that 99% of healthy plants in the right environment will contain these organisms naturally on them already. And it actually helps in like the curing process of the bud, even like further in with breaking and converting down sugars into starches and things like that. And then, it adds to the flavor of the product.
And speaking of smells, because we're in a room that smells so beautifully of giant, beautiful ladies, can you talk more about the terpenes and how you work with those and how you pay attention to them?
We do terp testing. It's something that I would really like to see in the future, people going in and asking, hey, what's the terp profile on this, rather than what's the THC percentage. I would really love to see that be the thing, because even with like wholesale, it's like you have to have X percentage THC or your value drops like crazy, and to me that's just ridiculous. So
yeah, it should be terpene levels, at certain levels will be worth more. So like the more flavorful your product is, the more value it will hold, essentially.
Not only the flavor, people need to understand that terpenes really are the driver's seat of your high. Otherwise, THC in general is you're going to feel the same if you're smoking just THC. Terpenes really are the driving force behind the different feelings you feel when you're medicating. And I think as the consumer gets more educated, the lawmakers get more educated and can keep up with, what we're trying to do. And I think we're all trying to be the most innovative, and we just need the industry itself, the people behind it and regulating this industry to kind of catch up and keep up. And I think that's been, with the organic, the microbial testing here, that's really a setback. We're not able to really expand on our organic growing practices because of, we might fail a microbial test even though it's all beneficial microbes. We need to get our lawmakers more educated in the differences of growing practices and how these things might affect future growing practices. So it's an interesting time. These next few years we're really starting to see lawmakers starting to update their laws a little bit, kind of working with the cultivators and the processors and stores in the industry, and trying to work together that makes it easier on everybody. I mean, there's a lot of work to still be done to make the industry a little bit better, but in all due time, it's still very young. I mean, really, it's only been legal for 4 years now, so we're still very early on in this industry, but we'll see.
And speaking of education, do you hear more people talking about the terp profiles and not using the sativa indica false dichotomy?
Yes, I think that's more, people are becoming more aware that it's actually the terpenes within these plants that are going to cause, you to feel more racy, or you to feel more relaxed or more tired or things like that. Yes, the cannabinoids definitely play a role in that as well, the different effects that they have, but a lot of these, you could simply modulate a high by smoking THC and then eating a mango, and that would modulate your high, just because the terpenes within the mango now will allow different things to happen. Its enzymes are shutting off, different receptors are activated. It's just an overall array. It's like a different play going on.
All right, so can you tell me about the room that we're in now?
This is one of our medical rooms, but medical and recreational are grown the exact same way. We put every amount of love into every single one of these plants. So yeah, we got some Scroopy Noopers right here, which was actually what we won first place with potency and third place with terpenes in the grow off last year. So that's really cool. We're really excited to be able to get this back on the shelves for everybody. This is about a week out from harvest right now. So all these plants have just been getting plain H2O for the past week and a half, and then they'll continue to just do just straight water to flush out any of the rest of the nutrients, like the fish hydroxylate that's in there, and any of the natural salts that are in there as well. You can really see that in the overall end product when you smoke it. Like the ash is very, very white colored, not that dark gray, which is really indicating that all those impurities are out of there. So.
And you said you put the same amount of love in the medical and recreational, but what's the technical difference in this state about how you have to operate between those two systems for growing?
So really just keeping them separate in the containers is the biggest thing for us. Like, we can't put recreational plant next to this plant in the same bed. That's just something that they look at as a negative for whatever reason. So it's really just the licensing that's the difference.
Testing was different up until a little while ago, but now they're making it more standardized throughout, where you also have to now test your medical just as much as you would your recreational. Before they weren't worrying too much about the medical because it had been going on for so long. They assumed people kind of knew what they were getting into, and then the recreational, they kind of just made it so you got to test every last thing right away. Every product we make has to be tested. So.
And that was like the most backwards thing that I found out when I had learned in the industry. And I mean, like, why are we not testing medical patients' product, but only recreational? Like, that.
And what is the standard testing regimen around Colorado?
It's GCMS, and so basically, big old machine. They put your cannabis in there. They spin it up with maybe ethanol or some kind of solution, get it mixed evenly, and then they stick it in this machine. It heats it up, splatters that through this spectral thing that they can look at, and then essentially they can tell that from that point, if it's this height on this spectrum, there's this much THC. If it's this height on this spectrum, there's this much CBD or CBG or whatever. So it can kind of just tell based on, I think it's based on mainly the heat at which it would evaporate at, or it would boil at.
So that for cannabinoids, and then for terpenes, but also contaminants testing and pesticides testing.
Yeah, the pesticides you have to pass, I think it's 6 weeks standard before they'll like approve you for like you won't have to test every plant for pesticides as long as for 6 weeks you pass the pesticide tests. Same thing with microbial. If you get basically when you start a new product, you have to send it out for 6 weeks. If it passes each one of those tests for 6 weeks straight, and there has to be a certain amount of tests too that you give them. If all of those pass through, then they'll certify you to like be safe, and then you don't have to send it out anymore until 6 months to a year later.
You have to renew it once a month now. So the new regulation is you do it for 6 months, you get process validated in microbial and potency. Then after that, you have to use one batch a month just to renew your process validation. But I think that's good for a year. And then you have to do the whole 6 weeks again to renew it for the next year, and then goes through the same process. But if you fail, you have to start over.
Yeah.
So if you fail microbial, even if it's for beneficials, you fail. If you fail pesticide, you have to keep doing it until you pass. So sometimes it takes some people quite a bit of testing just to get things moving along. But only thing we've really, like Jamie had mentioned, microbial has been the thing for us with our beneficial microbes. And that's something we wish that the labs in the state would kind of look into. I know in California they've already looked into it because of the amount of organic gardening out there. It was already an issue, and people were already bringing it up before regulation was coming into play. For Colorado, hydro is probably the most used growing system in the state, so it hasn't been a big issue for a lot of people until some of the organic gardeners started popping up like us.
So testing's a pretty serious expense.
Yeah.
It's a big expense. Right now, I think testing in general costs around anywhere from $50 to $75 a test. So think about, we have to do that for almost every single batch during the process validation process. In this room alone, there's every strain you see here on that list behind your back, that is a batch. So that's $50 to $75 a test for every single one of these strains.
Can I list off the names?
Absolutely.
And they have Blue Dream, Cold Creek Kush, Durban Haze, a personal favorite, Elmer's Glue number 4 and 5, Grape Stomper, Harlequin, Marijuana OG, Lemon Pie, Moonshine Haze, OG number 1, Scroopy Noopers, Super Lemon Haze, and Wi-Fi OG. As the plants are getting closer to getting harvested, what are you watching the most that you can still help with and help their life cycle?
Really just at this point, it's supporting the weight of the flowers, making sure that no branches are snapping, really just making sure that they have proper moisture content the entire time. We spend a lot of time looking for the pistils to be turning. That's really how we kind of determine, just more on a more production-based level. We could spend time looking at the trichomes and try to get a slightly under 10% amber ratio is really ideal. But we're constantly cutting down and replanting every week, so we're really taking a look at these pistils, and that's how we'll judge the harvest order of what's going to come down by what's most ripe at that point. So we really try to make sure everything gets as full time that we can to ripen completely.
Mm-hmm. I also think one of the most important things to look for as you are inching towards the harvest date is the trichome development as far as for resin production. If you're going to go in on a plant, you can look right now if it has the proper resin or if it doesn't. As far as for extraction purposes, a lot of the things I think on that side you want to keep an eye on are just preserving the trichomes as you harvest, because a lot of they're very fragile. A lot of times as you harvest, you're losing trichomes, which essentially you're losing the medicinal quality of the plant. It sticks to everything. That's the resin that sticks to your hands or to your clothes or to whatever you're using cannabis with. But if you're handling the bud too much in harvest, things like that, lose percentages in THC, lose percentage in the cannabinoid and the terpenes, all that.
And then how do you decide exactly when to harvest? Is it a little bit of an art to figure out when?
No, we're on a really heavy production basis, so every Thursday we'll start to harvest a new room, and by the following Wednesday they're finished, and that next Thursday we're replanting that room. So
We're in a beautiful sea of green with plants higher than my head going as far as the eye can see, with big giant buds surrounded by a really nice netting system that keeps the plants supported and keeps them from falling over. They look like miniature trees, and it seems like if they didn't have really careful support, it could damage the plants.
So it's just really cool just to set up how we have like a really old school Humboldt, Northern California vibe with these, it's like an outdoor style that we're doing indoors, which is a really cool thing. So.
I'd also like to add that a lot of the power here is supported through solar. So the whole roof is completely lined with solar panels. So that's a huge for us.
So here's the trim room with giant beautiful buds on trays.
Post-production here. So two different sets of trim. We do the wet trim and the dry trim. The wet trim essentially just to get the majority of the fan leaves off to break the plants down and a little bit smaller. So we hang them on racks in our dry room just to help them dry out a little bit more evenly. And then they do take off a little bit, I think extra than people normally would, just to make sure that the trim that we're even getting, it tests just as high as our flour does. The hash that's made with it is really great colored hash. It's not like trim run hash that you think $20 a gram garbage stuff. It comes out really, really nice. So that's part of the process, just trying to keep the quality the best that we can through and through. And this is another essential part because we can, clone it for 2 weeks, put it for 8 weeks in veg and 9 weeks in flour, and then it can really be, that whole process can be destroyed within this next few weeks of trimming and curing it. So this is such an important piece of the puzzle that unfortunately seems like trimmers always get shit on in the industry, you know what I mean? And that sucks because their job is just as important as any of our jobs here. So.
Yeah. And a backbreaking job too, oftentimes.
Yeah, man. And I have all the respect in the world for these people that sit here and can trim for 40 hours a week because I know I sure as hell can't. So.
What do you do in just the initial cut down and harvest to protect the plants and keep them best for this stage?
It's really just monitored closely by our harvest manager. So they're in that room every day, just checking the quality, checking the moisture content of the buds, and see when it needs to. So that process is they'll hang, and when they start to get dry enough to the point where we want to wet trim them, we'll put them in a brown bag to slow that drying process down much further, brown paper bag.
What happens to the various parts of the plant that don't end up as the perfect buds going to the store? So first, the fan leaves are removed. Do the fan leaves go somewhere?
Nope, that's just waste, and we'll compost all that. So
And so do the stalks also go into the compost?
Yep.
Okay. And then when you have these bigger buds here, what happens to the trim off of them?
That gets packaged up separately and either sold to other processors or we'll process it in-house into BHO. Only thing that trim is only going to extracts. We either sell to another extract company or we make it in-house with our own extract company.
How different is this from this? Is the content going to be that different, or is it more of a consumers expect to see something like this?
The consumer wants the flower.
It's a higher content.
It is a higher content.
The trim typically has around 10 to 15% total cannabinoid terpene.
We did some trim testing not too long ago.
But just for the record, our trim's fire enough that I would roll it up in a blunt and smoke it. So.
Also, we do another process, so that's for flower, essentially the bud that's going to be smoked. Before that, there's also bud that's going to be used for fresh frozen that we're going to be using to extract in the ice water extract. So what we'll do with that is it will get chopped out of the harvest or out of the room same way as this would, except it's hung up and each branch is cut off fresh, and then each bud is also chopped off fresh, put into a bag and frozen immediately. What that does, that preserves the fresh terpenes, preserves the resin in the way in which it is in the freshest state, and then can now dry off the plant to achieve a better quality extract.
So those volatile terpenes are the hardest thing to preserve. They're some of the toughest parts for you, is just to keep those smells there so they're not wasted before they get to consumer.
Absolutely, especially in the fresh frozen for the ice water extracts and things like that. We need to preserve all the terpene that we possibly can. The whole process from chop all the way through till you get a gram of hash in your hand is kept under 50 degrees.
This is a big facility. I did not see all of it last time. Wow. The posters are great. You have Pink Floyd's The Wall. You have Grateful Dead posters. All right, so now we're in the lab filled with all of the equipment. Actually, can you tell me about the equipment we can see here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the solventless extraction area. We only use ice water, heat, and pressure on this side to extract the resin from the plant. Basically, when you walk in, we have our freeze dryers. These are scientific. This is a scientific freeze dryer. Essentially, you can come over to this machine. You can program it to get to a certain temperature. Anywhere from negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to, I think, 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't ever need to go that high. Essentially what it does is it freeze dries the hash. The vacuum in this will drop to full vacuum. Will allow the water to go. It's called sublimation. Essentially the frozen water goes straight to a gas, freezes on the outside of the chamber at negative 100 degrees, and dries the hash within it. This is the quickest way that we can get the fastest turnaround time with also preserving the terpenes and the resin in the way in which it needs to be preserved for smokable product. Yeah, so that's the freeze dryer machine.
What a system. And how old are these kind of systems and this kind of way of doing it?
2 years. I mean,
years, I
right
think
now there's only one company that makes them.
There's only these models have been on the market, for probably about 3 years. And honestly, that's the only company that makes a freeze dryer that you could buy. I mean, if you wanted to go buy a freeze dryer, you're going to spend $50,000. You have to be you have to be using it for pharmaceutical reasons or something like that. This is like the first home edition you can kind of get to do your own kind of work with.
That's such a cool thing about the cannabis industry is like all these other industries really received a big bump from it as well. Like we ordered our flower beds from a place in Kansas that make like feed troughs for farms. So like I don't know how much typically they would manufacture, but when we first opened up, I'd imagine that was a decent portion of their sales for the year, so that's just really cool to be able to support a whole bunch of other different industries within this industry as well.
So after that, we kind of have freezers, refrigerators. Those store the product either before it's being made or after it's being made. Anything that you see like below zero and like the negative 15 degree range, that's product that has been harvested out of one of the flower rooms, chopped into a bag and frozen immediately. Then we store it until it's being ran. That typically is a couple days. Once it comes out of that refrigerator, we wash it. Over here we have different equipment in which we use to separate the trichome heads from the plant. Essentially, the trichome head is the little crystal that's on top of the stalk that you see when you look at cannabis. That we're trying to remove that in the purest way possible without the stalk attached, just the head. That way it's a full melt product. We can achieve high purity, high potency, high terpene. To do that, it needs to go through a different set of micron filtration. So you'll start with like the higher micron to remove like larger amounts, and then you'll slowly filter that down to the smaller microns to get out the resins that are most desirable. Once you get the resin that's most desirable, then that's when it goes into our freeze dryer phase. Dries when it comes out dry. Now it goes into post-production where it will be grammed or turned into a solventless hash oil, which to do that, we come over to this press here. It's a 20-ton press. We can extract all the oil contained within the hash. We can leave behind any particulate, anything that's going to be undesirable in the resin. We leave that behind, and out comes on the other side, out comes resin. It's a high terpene, a little bit higher cannabinoid content because we're stripping away impurities. That's what you would consider the dabs, hash.
But instead of using butane like is so commonly done, you're one of the few doing it with no solvents.
Yes, so here we specifically are only focusing, we only use ice and water to separate the trichome head from the material. After that, the trichome heads, which were the purest, we keep those aside, sell those on their own, because that way someone's able to experience the most enjoyable part of that plant that's completely unadulterated. The stuff that's a little less desirable off the plant, that's the stuff that we press to now achieve a much more desirable product. And that is only using heat and pressure. We use no solvents, nothing like that. We've been working very hard to develop techniques to then further refine the product after that, to now remove terpenes, to remove fats and waxes, and then after that to remove cannabinoid, and we can separate those and then re-add them back together in special ways in which are most desirable to the people who want to use them.
And you often hear about this being one of the brave new worlds that is coming up, is breaking down to the components and then re-adding. Maybe be able to make one without THC at all in it, but every other part of the plant, and so people can pass a drug test but still get that taste.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the future. People are going to want to select the type of highs that they want. We're going to know soon that plants with limonene, yes, they're going to give me more of the heady-like effects that will make me more energetic. Plants with myrcene they will be more of that tired kind of relaxed feelings. And eventually we'll be able to have all these things in single components that you'll just be able to create your own.
In this section, Julian and Jamie will talk a good bit about something called land races. Land races are the original cannabis varieties that grew in the wild. Or sometimes they're the domesticated strains that escaped human cultivation centuries or millennia ago and now grow wild. They're quite important for modern cannabis breeding because they contain genetic components and novel characteristics that can be used to improve the cultivars we're growing with today. Would either of you like to share a little bit about the history of hash in general?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, hash has been around for millennia. We can go back thousands of years and, they've found artifacts of pipes and this and that. In reality, yeah, hash has been around not been around, but has been in use longer than flower, because initially flower wasn't very high in cannabinoid content. Initially, you go out to a flower, there'd be very little bits of resin on it. It'd be all like fluffy and be real skinny and wasn't much on it. So in order for them to get the most benefit off of this plant, they needed to create, they called it charas. It's a resin extracted with the hands. And what that does is that allows, your hands are warm. Those resins then stick to the hands. And when you remove that from the plant, it coats your hands. What they would do then is they'd scrape that off, ball it up, turn it into a ball. That would be called charas, finger hash, all different kinds of stuff. People still have that today. Scissor hash is kind of like the same thing in the trim world. But yeah, so that evolved. That ended up becoming something that was a high commodity. Could be used as trade, could be used as a currency, essentially, which that propelled the need to keep finding more plants that produce more resin. Yeah, as it evolved, they were able to find plants that contain high percentage of THC, high percentage of terpenes. It was coming off easily on the hands. They didn't know it was high THC. I guess they'd know from the psychoactivity. They didn't have test results like we do now. But they could see by the layer of hash being built on the hand which ones were producing more, which ones would have more. They'd save the seeds from that. And eventually that led into what we have today as the modern genetics that we use. I mean, most of that genetics, I'd say 99% of the genetics here come from that era of farmers that have worked their asses off for hundreds, thousands of years to find these genetics, or to preserve these genetics and keep progressing them to be better and better and better and better. And that's why we have such high THC percentages. That's why we're able to have bubble hash, because most of these plants, if you go take a land race and try to use it for water hash extract, you're not going to get anything. You'll get maybe 1 to 2% yields. It might have a unique terpene profile, maybe even have a unique cannabinoid profile, but it will never be feasible to have something for production that people will be able to use. Might be something for personal, but eventually those genetics will be crossed and bred into those older, Afghani, Moroccan, Nepalese, style of genetics, which will allow for more resin production, but with having those unique terpenes that we don't typically find in that Afghani profile.
From India to California.
Yeah, and I think that style that's been around for so long really has only changed since early '80s. I mean, that's really when you saw a difference from the quality of cannabis that was coming out in the '70s and '60s that really started getting popular in the U.S. and really seeing the genetics starting to based off from the underground guys that were breeding in house and like started playing around with these plants really on a more personal level. Really from the 80s, the 90s were a huge decade of just a lot of crazy breeding. A lot of OGs were starting to come out in the 90s. The sours were coming out in the 90s. Genetics that are base genetics for all these polyhybrids coming out now were really all created in the 80s and 90s. So really, production cannabis really wasn't being involved until this recent era. Back, it was all still that old school style, these old school genetics, land races that were growing naturally that we're getting all around the world. And it's really crazy to see how much cannabis has just progressed in 30, 40 years, even recently. So it's crazy to see what's in the next 10 to 20 years is going to be with genetics and what cannabis is going to look like then. But
yeah, it's hard because the land races are now being hybridized with all these polyhybrids like he was talking about, and now there is no pure land race anymore because the pollen, everything that these guys are growing, are genetics from California in Nepal now and in all over the world. So it's really.
Well, I think the breeders, there are a lot of those guys that are in those other countries, like the Nepalese and in India and the Himalayas. Like a lot of those land races still exist. There's still land races that are still undiscovered. There was one in Australia that was a red cannabis plant that was very rare. They found one plant out in the wild. Haven't been able to find it again. So there's still some interesting cannabis plants that are still around the world that are natural that we haven't even really got to discover yet. I mean, the Congolese red just got discovered within the past 3-4 years.
Yeah. Well, I think what's huge too
they
is
just allowed people from the outside world into the Congo to actually get seeds from it. Like, and a guy died doing it, from greenhouse. So. Yeah. There's some really cool explorations that are like some people in the out in Eastern Europe and the Dutch are really into the land races, in Amsterdam, and so those guys are still kind of living and keeping those genetics alive and still trying to discover these new land races. I think there's a ton of land races in Africa and a couple countries that we haven't had access to, just because of all the politics that are going on in there. And so it's interesting to see what's really going to come of cannabis worldwide and over the next decade or so, but. I really hope the land races don't die out. I think they are the integral part of why we are here today. And I think there's some cool things we could still do with land race strains that naturally have some amazing defenses that you can't find in these delicate polyhybrids that they're creating nowadays.
One of the problems here you talked about is acquiring genetics. What's it like in Colorado to have defined strains? Or how does the legal system set up for you to acquire strains you can use for production?
It's very difficult.
Yeah. Essentially, if we want to bring in a new strain, it has to be a strain that was created in a licensed facility, under license, in the licensed facility and under regulation. So you can't get anything that the underground breeders are doing or that the black market side is doing. You're supposed to stay away from all that stuff. Pollen is a gray area, so I'm not really sure. The MED doesn't really track pollen. You may have a better idea as to how these plants get in.
To that as well. I mean, pollen's just an area they're not familiar with and didn't set up a tab for that on metrics, so it takes some work for them to get that going, so I don't think it's something they're going to touch anytime soon. But yeah, it's really tough. I mean, you can't just buy a pack of seeds from online, or you can't just get some seeds from your buddy that did a breeding project and pop them in here. It's really regulated. I mean, it's got to be from another licensed facility, in which that makes me think to a point that it's going to be a stalemate with genetics in Colorado at a certain point if they're going to continue to have the rules like this, because it's only going to be so many strains with all the licenses that they have, and there's no more licenses being allowed in Denver right now as well because of the amount of shops that there are. So hopefully that's something that they'll look into, because that's definitely something that's frustrating for us. I mean, we want to constantly be trying new genetics and being able to see what medicine we can really grow with these different strains. So.
All right, now we're going into the solvent processing area. So another lab that's even labbier.
Hello.
Hey, good to see you.
How are you?
Good, good.
My name is Steele. I am the head extractor here at Fuego, which is underneath the Verde umbrella. But we do hydrocarbon extraction and distillation in this room here. So, but they give us the fresh frozen flower, and we basically pack it into our fancy machine over there, which is chilled to -50, just to keep it extra cold to preserve the terpenes. But yeah, we run a mixture of butane and propane through that fresh frozen material, and then inside the closed loop system we boil off the butane, and then what's left we then do further vacuum purges and various techniques to post-process that into various styles.
And can you tell me about the machine itself? Because it looks like a beauty.
Yeah.
We can't go in there because it might blow up, correct?
With the electronics, we cannot, but this is an ETS Mini MEP. So ETS is a local company. They're basically all American made. They provided us with these cryo chillers. They have jacketed input and output coils as well, so it chills the butane as well as chills the column. But yeah, this room in particular is a custom room that we actually specially built.
And for the people who get nervous about hearing the words like butane and propane, tell me about the safety process and how you know the safety of your final product.
Yeah. Are you talking like safety for consumption or safety while manufacturing?
Actually, both.
Yeah. So basically, this room is designed to have an equal balance of air input and output. So any gas that's in there is immediately taken and sucked up and dissipated throughout the atmosphere. So it's basically safe for us to handle that machine only inside of this room. But as far as the safety of the product when it comes out, we do a preliminary purge inside of this room to remove like a majority of the butane. And then, based on what product we're trying to make, like if we're trying to just make trim shatter, for example, we'll bring it out here once it's safe to handle. We bring it out here and put it into the vacuum oven for, I think, anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, depending on the batch. But that actively pulls all the residual solvent out through the pump, and then it actually goes up through the same exhaust system as well. But we test every single batch like the state makes us do. So every single thing we put out has passed residual solvents, and it's well under the limit. And we actually provide a QR code on each package that you can look up and see the actual test results from the lab that we see, that the state sees. So yeah, we're trying to be as transparent as possible, because with the butane and stuff, it is a neurotoxin. It can be bad when you ingest it. So we're trying to just make sure it's the cleanest, safest stuff possible. And a lot of our stuff is coming out non-detectable.
And can you talk about the range of concentrates, what those various words mean that people hear all the time?
Basically, it's separated into a couple different categories. There's dry or extracts that are made with dry material, like that's been cured and trimmed off the plant, and then there's the fresh frozen material. So those are kind of the two big categories, but the big popular one right now is like trim shatter. It's basically the most economic. It still tastes good, it's still potent, but it's cheap to make, it's cheap to buy. It's kind of the most popular method of extracts. But there's other dry material extracts you can make. You can make dry trim sugars. You can experiment with dry trim FSE, like crystals and terps. But yeah, so that's the dry material. And then the live resin is where we get into the nice stuff, because you can have what people are calling as like full spectrum extracts, which are crystallization with the terpene separation, and then you reincorporate it into equal ratios. And it's definitely the most aesthetically pleasing process is the full spectrum extracts. But live resin can vary. It kind of just depends on the size of the crystals. The quality of the terpenes is kind of how people distinguish the different types. Most people would refer to like a big diamond with terpenes floating around. They'd call that either like sauce or full spectrum. But the smaller crystals with the small terps is still the same product and the same ratios, but it's called something different. So there's also live butters, which we actually have right here if you wanted to take a look at it. So that's basically, this method is just a light heat, and then we use manual agitation to homogenize all of the cannabinoids and the terpenes together. So it's, instead of like separating and then reincorporating, this version is just homogenizing it all at once and making sure it's purged that way. We're branching into making just straight crystals, like no terpenes on them at all. Working with distillate, working with some live resin pens, like vape cartridges, so people can just have that nice, like it feels like you're taking a dab. It's not cut with anything. It's not distillate. It's actually just straight live resin that's in a cartridge ready to smoke. We haven't really branched into our distillation yet because we're so new. So once we have the need to do some distillate for edibles or syringes or whatever people want, we'll branch into that. But
Can you define distillate and how that process looks?
yeah, so the distillation process occurs after the actual initial extraction through the closed loop. So we'll take it out of that extraction machine, and then you basically do a process that's called decarboxylation, which removes the carboxyl group from the actual THC chain, which allows it basically converts it from THC-A to delta-9 THC. Then you can do any number of other processes. You can winterize it to make it thinner and remove the heavy waxes, but you don't necessarily have to, depending on what your end goal is. But then you take that material that you've processed, decarboxylated, and you put it into that short path machine, and that basically is similar to the closed loop, but you're actually just boiling the cannabinoid oil, the cannabis oil, and then isolating in different fractions specific temperature ranges that you want. So, THC boils from X temperature to X temperature. You cap fraction off that little bit when it's ready, and that right there's your distillate. So people add that to edibles, they add it to vape cartridges, any number of products, because it has minimal taste, and it's usually 95 to like 99% potency. So it's definitely the most potent and technically cleanest, because it doesn't have any flavor. But yeah, that's definitely, it's the most heavily processed of all of the cannabis extracts as far as the amount of steps to get to an actual distillate grade product. But yeah, it's a fun world. It's way more sciencey than a lot of people realize. It's filtration and capturing temperatures. It's pretty nuts.
Can you just tell me what the different things are on this table?
Absolutely. So over here on the right side of the table, we have it's called a steam distillation apparatus. So basically what we do with this is you load this biomass flask here full of plant material. It can be fresh frozen or dried trim material. Then we have a steam generator that boils water and steams it, sends it through this diffuser flask here that actually distills the water, sends it up through the plant material. The water grabs all of the water-soluble terpenes that are in there, and then it actually boils those into a vapor, goes up to the top to this distillation head here, where it starts its recondensation from a vapor back down to a liquid. Then it goes through our gram condenser here, which is chilled. We have a ice water bath that recirculates and keeps this around 30 degrees. So once the vapor hits here, it pretty much recondenses to a liquid, falls down. Then we have a mixture of what will be what's called hydrosol at the bottom, and then you have the steam-derived terpenes floating up top. They're actually visibly separating. So this bottom oil-water separator here will, during the whole distillation, it slowly drains the hydrosol out of the end here. Then at the end, when all the hydrosol is drained out, you can simply just open that, and then you capture your steam terpenes, and they're water clear and extremely potent. They are... you smell one of the vials and it's almost too strong because it's the most potent terpenes you can get. So, it's definitely stuff you get it on your hands and you go into like a grocery store. People literally you're turning heads because you smell like weed so much, because it's just the concentrated essence of the plant in the most potent form. And
the terpenes are worth more per weight than anything else in the plant, correct?
Yes. Hash can get expensive, but the terpenes are definitely where a lot of the cost comes from, because with this apparatus here, we're just using the plant material to get terpenes. We're not isolating the THC from that after the fact. So it definitely ends up being a pretty pricey endeavor, but it ends up being rewarding because it helps, flavor a lot of products with actual organic good cannabis flavor, not synthetic blueberry terpenes from China or something. We can actually flavor things with the flavors that these guys spend so much time growing and trying to keep them all good. But the health departments come in and they're glad that we're doing it this way, because they've had so many recalls due to just synthetic terpenes. These terpenes that you get shipped in in a gallon container comes from China. You don't know what plant material that was made with. You don't know the facility it was made with. Pesticides that were used. So here, we know the quality of the plant material that goes in there to begin with and how well it's taken care of. So, and especially since we're a single source lab, we only source from Verde Natural. The health department really loves that we're doing this because they can track it all the way back to the seed, or the clone, I should say, that we planted. So yeah, it's definitely the healthier option as far as the flavoring agents go for vape pens and stuff. Yeah.
This is the shop press, a 20-ton press.
This is a stainless steel screen, and inside of it, we have our pucked up hash, pretty much, our ice oil.
Incredibly fine
This
steel.
is a 25 micron stainless steel mesh.
Big slab of hash.
Yeah, it's about a 30 gram puck.
30 grams of hash. And so pressing 30 grams of that hash, what are you going to get off of the press?
We'll probably get about 80% yield. Remaining, whatever stays behind is all plant matter, stuff we don't want in our product.
Okay. So this is really a next step of purification. And so what would be the name of that hash versus what's going to come out?
So this is just considered bubble hash. When it comes out, we call it solventless hash oil. Some people call it rosin as well, live rosin.
This is really industrial rosin.
From there, we switch over to hand crank, so it's more manual, more control.
Yeah, and essentially you're just kind of slowly working it. You want to basically bring those plates together as slow as possible to allow the hash in the middle to warm up. Once that warms up, the oil starts to move more freely and now can be excreted through the other side of that screen right there.
So did you have to experiment a lot with the temperature of this?
Absolutely. The temperature is huge. Each strain even is going to it'll have a different profile at a different temperature. It'll taste different if you do it too high or if you do it really low. So you can see
there it
oils
is.
are starting to come out.
Ooze out there.
Little golden oil ball.
Yeah.
And so this parchment paper is the cleanest way to let it get captured.
Yes, parchment paper is basically the most used tool in a hash lab. Straight up. The terpene percentages of this product are typically the same as like our ice oil would test, maybe a slight percentage higher, just because you're removing the contaminant. So really, if you're looking at terpenes, the difference between the ice oil and the show is going to be very minute. It's going to be more so in the melt quality that the difference is going to be in, whereas the show has a long shelf life, very stable, full melt. You can dab it, you can use it in a pen, you can use it, 1,000 different ways. The ice oil is more of a delicate product. It has a lesser of a shelf life. You have to keep it cold. Using that product requires more knowledge. Like, you have to know more about it because it's difficult to use otherwise. It's a lot tackier. Or it comes in a granular state and then could be difficult to get on a dabber or into a nail or onto a bowl or however you're going to use it. So the show is a lot more user friendly than the ice oil.
And it's kind of a new idea, this rosin idea of just pressing.
Yeah, I mean, rosin, it's been around for a while, but the modern way in which it's done has only been around probably for 3 or 4 years now, and maybe even less. The real change that's been happening is within the machine that's actually doing the pressing. As you can see here, this is a standard 20-ton shop press, straight hand-built. This thing, is about as basic as they get. There's other models out there now that are starting to get very, very scientific, a lot more precise in the temperatures at which you press at, a lot more controllable pressure ranges. Speed at which it presses is also a huge variable. We kind of have a good control over that by using the hand press model.
God, look at that beautiful golden coming off there. How much of a plant did it take? How
That's
many plants?
probably at least 2 or 3 full plants being squished right now.
What would a typical plant yield in terms of the various ways that you might process it?
Flour typically is around a ½ pound a plant, right?
Depending on strain. I mean, we have some strains that are like 0.35 pounds a plant, but they're just really proprietary, amazing genetics. So we're willing to like grow a little bit less of a yield for just the amazing quality of it. But we have, I mean, even some strains that go up to a little over 3/4 pound a plant. So there's a huge variance with our overall production with each strain.
And then each of those plants is gonna, based on its genetics, where it comes from, how it was bred, will produce different quantities of resin. So like for BHO, they can essentially use any plant in the garden, like they were saying, and get the max THC, the max terpene, the max everything off of that. Here, in the solventless side, we have to use more of those genetics that have been curated for water hash, like we were talking about earlier with they spent hundreds of years to create these genetics that the resin would come off very easily on the hand. That's the type of plant that works well for the water hash, is when the resin just basically falls right off the plant. A little bit of a sandier, like a tacky sandy kind of feel on the resin, not so much of that slimy feel that some of the, like Durban haze, for example, very slimy, would not work at all for water hash. Now, you know, you go look at like the Chemi Jones, a very nice, like tacky, sandy, very sticky, that's bred specifically for water hash.
Because there's that old Moroccan method, right, of just going in a small round room and beating the hell out of the plants.
Yeah, so that also plays into that too, with after the Charis, you know, there was the Moroccans who were using, just the big old, they'd use like a bed sheet almost, like a sheet, like a cloth sheet, big old cotton sheet, and they'd tie it very tight over these, almost like make a drum out of it, you know, and they literally beat this drum with big old stalks of plants out of the field, and underneath what would come through the screen into the inside of that drum would be the trichome heads and the resin. The plants obviously that produced more resin, they kept the seeds from those, kept those going, so a lot of that genetic still lives today.
I think some of the most fun, exciting parts around here is that so many of these methods are so old. I mean, you're doing it very professionally and modern, but it goes all the way back.
We're just taking new technology and old styles and putting the two together.
Now, Michael, how do you know when it's about time to stop pressing?
You'll see the flow slowly start to recede as you start hitting that 5 to 10 ton range. Yeah, it's more of a play it by feel, play it by eye. See if it's flowing out.
Yeah, if nothing's coming out, you basically have achieved what it's going to achieve. We let it sit for another maybe like 10 seconds at that full pressure just to see if anything else will come out. Typically it doesn't. Then we pop it up and pull it out. And then that resin is then collected, homogenized manually, and then grammed out.
And so now it comes off the press, and wow, that's beautiful.
It's the most pure form of resin that you essentially can achieve without using solvents or harmful other hydrocarbons that could potentially be left in the product.
It's trays in a big vacuum. What does it look like?
It's a beach sand is what they call this. Each one of those specks in there is a trichome head. So what you see on the bud when you're looking at it, and people call them crystals or whatever, they're trichomes, and the actual head itself is, one of those dots right there. Each one of these has their own characteristics, has their own terpene concentrations, their own cannabinoid concentrations, and it's all based on the maturity that trichome head was as when that plant was harvested.
But we're perfect.
Awesome. I got you on some goodies outside on your way out.
Yeah? Shit, that's really sweet. You didn't do that, but I do appreciate it. That meant a lot to me. That was being able to go to that store and see what a good... Greener Grass is a BlueBird Botanicals podcast. Their CBD oil supports a healthy body and a strong endocannabinoid system. They've got friendly customer service who can answer any of your questions, and the number is right there at the top of their webpage. But, per the FDA, they won't be able to make any medical claims for these nutritional supplements. That's also the reason you'll hear little about CBD on this show. There's no need for us to add more evidence about CBD when a simple Google search will give you more than you can read in a month of Sundays. So this show covers the cannabis world and more with editorial freedom from BlueBird Botanicals. Thanks for joining the Greener Grass podcast. As always, our audio alchemist is Matt Payne. The Gypsy Jazz theme music comes from Brett Van Donsel. Our beautiful bird sounds are courtesy of Lang Elliott. And I'm your host, Lex Pelger, wishing you a bright green day.